Good morning. I declare the March meeting of the Finance Committee open. Morena, good morning. Welcome. Welcome to Councillors Mangai Hemi, to staff, to press, to those watching on the live stream and those on Zoom. So apologies. I have apologies for from Councillor O'Leary, who is late, who's going to be late, for Councillor Nadu Roof for early departure. And are there any other further apologies?
Just got one from Councillor Ryan, who will be a bit late.
Thank you, Mark. No other apologies, so I'll move. I'll second. Thank you. Those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Declarations of interest. There are no declarations. Public forum. Do we have any speakers in public forum?
We just need to do the confirmation of the agenda.
Oh, okay, I'll come back to that. Right, thank you. I've missed the confirmation of the agenda, and that is item 2. I'd also like to add to that we will do our best to accommodate Andrew Mickle from NZ Local Government Funding Agency as it works around the meeting and when he's available to present. But I believe that he is scheduled to be here at around 11 a.m. this morning. Okay, so Councillor Ewan, you've moved the confirmation of the agenda. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Mark. Those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. All right, so we move on to item 5, which is the confirmation of the Finance Committee open minutes on page 6. Are there any inaccuracies in those minutes? Thank you. Thank you. Before we put the motion, there are a couple of, there's one item there, item 10, which is a workshop on CE cost savings. And I'm just perhaps asking, have we been able to schedule a date for that meeting?
We're just working through the date.
Okay.
But one of the things that we're aiming to do, as you would have heard in the last committee, is that there's been a total revamp of the way we record our transformational cost optimisation savings, and so we're working through that now. And we want to come up with a totally brand new way of presenting transformation in the CE's cost savings, and we'll bring that back. It's likely to be late April or early May.
Right.
Just to clarify, we do have a date, but just checking with my team.
Okay, fine. I guess from our point of view, it will be critical that we have this before the end of the before the 30th of June anyway. Okay. So we're ready to implement whatever changes are necessary in the
19th of May.
19th of May. Okay.
So you're absolutely right. It's a big feeder into the 10-year plan program. So we're preparing ourselves for success in that context. So looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. All right. So we have a mover and a seconder for the minutes. Is there any discussion? Those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Chair's report. Chair's report is on page 11. And I'll take the Chair's report as read. I just want to perhaps make a couple of very quick comments, and that is that the intent of the matters that I've raised in the Chair's report is to alert elected members who may not already have been aware that there are various pressure points coming on from staff, and I know that there's been discussions at various points around the building about matters of staff being under pressure to prepare reports. So I've used my report as an opportunity to alert you all to the fact that management are looking at this seriously and welcome input as they work to find a solution that addresses the particular issues and addresses them in a way that's sufficient. use of staff resources and finances. And then the second part of the report is input from Maxine, Councillor Maxine, giving us an update on the procurement policy. So I'll open the floor to any questions. Oh, good. Councillor Bunting.
Thank you, Chair. My question is around just the nature of, I get the pressure that staff are under at the moment. I just want to ask a general question, perhaps of yourself and maybe governance, about us doing our day-to-day jobs, like someone asks us to ask the council to do something like a street issue or something to that effect. This doesn't allude to that, I take it. We can still maintain that kind of rapport with staff for our communities?
That wasn't my intent. I figured that wasn't, and I'll take some advice from staff on that, but dealing with a resident query and directing that to the appropriate staff for resolution or for outcomes. Right. I didn't see that as being...
No, you're correct, both. It does not impact on your ability to engage with your community.
Yeah, great.
Yeah, I mean, I think the appreciation is if it's more than just a notification of a fix and there's more depth required, it may take longer to achieve. Right. But if it's, regular, normal approaches by the community for that pothole or lawns need to be clipped and stuff like that, then we're appropriately geared for that because the community could come straight to us as well.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Next question from Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Rob. My question is to staff just regarding the corresponding increase in spend for consultants at the same time, because not only are we saying as an organisation we're having to employ more staff at a significant cost. I wonder if staff could also give me an update currently on what outside consultants we're currently spending, the quantum, to manage the more in-depth reports they provide. Because we're being told on one hand, you're asking for too many we're asking for a lot of reports, a lot of intense working, and that has the results of increasing staff numbers. But I also thought we were contracting out a lot of this, so I need to see the two contemporaneously to get a real understanding.
Tracy, would...
Sure. So in the February results, we've spent year-to-date $6 million in consultant fees against a budget of $4.5 million.
So that's quite a significant spend above what was projected. Could management tell me whether or not we intend to live within our budget this year, which will mean, is this an unusually high period of consultancy demand? So will that lessen over the balance of the financial year?
So if you remember, it's the same when I talk about the personnel costs as well. Most of that comes with revenue. So a lot of that, for example, comes out of the growth area and the consents and those sorts of things. So if we've got extra staff working or we've got extra consultants, most of the time it comes with revenue attached to it.
To make sure that Councillor Wilson's questions is answered in its completeness, we probably need to draw the information that tells that story together in one position so the elected members can do that. I'm assuming it's in the finance reports when we get to that item. So is it practical to pick that up at not leave it on the table and pick that up at
the annual monitoring report? I know that it has been identified.
If that satisfies Councillor Wilson, that is.
Yeah. Suffice to say, if I can add to your question, those costs are not coming solely from the demands of elected members. And I hope I've made that clear in my report that we're one of the parties contributing to the work required by staff, but only one, that there are others out there.
Thank you for that. My last question in relation to Tracy's comments concerning attached revenue as a result of external consultants' work. Can she verify if that is actual revenue achieved or projected revenue to achieve in the future as a result of potential DCs or other revenue sources for events that have yet to happen and may take some time to happen?
Both. So it includes the fees and charges that we would be charging now, which you can see coming through in the financial results quite positively. And it also includes the work, obviously, with DCs in that space as well, which obviously, as you know, comes in over time. But again, we are well ahead of budget in that area as well.
I think, Tracy, I don't want to talk through or past the elected members, just if you can just tolerate my rudeness. Tracy, if we can just pull that together in a one-size-fits-all type approach so the elected members can see that construct, because it's easier to show with numbers than it is to talk about it. And I think then the elected members might have some more refined questions about the detail they may want to pick up as well. So if we can cover that in the finance section, if we can't cover it in the finance section, I suggest we would take it away to bring back in another venue very quickly so they can see that.
Thanks, Councillor Ewan. Before I ask Councillor Dave, I'll move to Councillor Margaret on Zoom.
Thank you, Chair Rob. Just a very quick question around the procurement paragraph. First of all, to find I'm really pleased to see that there's great consideration given to the natural environment and biodiversity. Setting actions and targets of these things have a positive impact. What sort of across the organisation input have we had from staff around setting those targets and actions, please?
Maxine, would you like to answer that?
Thanks, Margaret. It's a really good question, and at this stage it's very, very early days in terms of the discussion, and certainly nowhere near the point of being able to set any specific targets, although I refer back to the Nature in the City and the document that is being developed through your committee, and that my expectation is that there would be a lot of synergy between both of those, and you would be able to see across one into the other.
Awesome. Thanks, Maxine.
Councillor Kesh.
Thank you, Chair Rob. Just a question around your note in the report regarding personnel costs and the 14% increase on our current year. Just asking, at which point do we get more transparency as to what these costs or which units or departments these costs would be spent on?
Tracy?
So if you remember, I did talk about that at the meeting that we had in December when Councillor Rob asked me exactly the same question to explain what that personnel cost was. So it's made up of many things. There's obviously the percentage increase for our staff that we have got included in that. There's obviously the big district plan piece of work that we've got extra staff included to cover that. And there's various other projects that we're bringing on extra staff to cover for. And again, remembering a lot of that is again offset by the revenue that that comes with it. So we've got quite a few areas of the business that obviously if they're doing extra work, bringing in extra revenue, the personnel costs go up in that space. So as far as then seeing it in an individual activity, that was also in the financial statement. So you can see that in the activity statements that we sent, that would have been part of the pack that went out for consultation. And you can see in each of the activities what personnel relates to what activity in those documents as well.
All right, I'll go have a hunt. Thanks, Tracy.
Thanks, Kesh. Councillor Dave.
Thanks, Chair. Through you, perhaps to the General Manager in the first instance, though you may like to answer it as well, it's your report after all. I'm looking at the bit that says, in discussion with the CEO, we've agreed to review requests, including those from elected members, to ensure they're on point and likely to be of interest and relevance to the organisation. Is that same test applied to Lgfa requests from outside the council? Or do we just answer everything that comes in, I guess, is the counter?
We're legally responsible for answering all Lgfa requests, so we answer them all as they come in. In terms of the first part of your statement, Richard and I are trying to work out what sort of appropriate filter would be there and what sort of appropriate response would be depending on the different requests from elected members in terms of how things may be responded to. Sometimes some requests are really easy and we want to support elected members as much as possible, but sometimes there's a question that might take a whole lot of work, and so we would just work with that elected member to say, is this effort that we would need to put in, you know, is that level of detail what you're after before we go down and do that piece of work?
Could I jump in here and further support the response, Mr. Chair, Councillor Dave? I think that's a yes. So firstly, we do actually go back to our Lgfa requestees and ask for context of the question, because a portion of the time the requests are very much a scattergun approach, trying to sort information through, and we do pursue to narrow them down. Actually, the work we're going to be doing is not necessarily about general information requests, but it's about requesting information, broader work to be done that doesn't necessarily fit or align clearly with the requests from committees and councils. So the work is looking for how do we best meet the needs of the committee and making sure we work with the elected member to ensure that it aligns with that committee's responsibilities. So it's not in any way, shape or form trying to curtail the elected member's duties. It's more about making sure that we provide it in the most direct and informative way. There has been various pieces of requests that have gone through the organisation to a lower level, and we'll talk about lower level staff, that have been serviced out of context, and we haven't necessarily connected up with other work done by other parts of the organisation as well. So what we're trying to do is be a bit more efficient in our time, so we don't have a number of people pulling information together to satisfy one request from different elected members.
So, circling back to the issue of a filter, is the word that David used there. If a filter is applied to potentially to a elected member request, then their backup alternative could be a Lgfa request to council, and then you'd have to answer it and go through all the work.
Oh, no, so a couple of things is I think we have to declare between requesting information that's readily available. We're not going to get in the way of anyone, whether they're elected members or the community, requesting information that's readily available. There has been requests from elected members that have required additional work to be done, and that's the part I'm talking about here.
I'm looking at the Chair's report, though, which says including those requests from elected members to ensure they are on point and likely to be of interest and relevance to the organisation. That's sort of saying the filter is the organisation, whether they think they're worthwhile or not.
No, it's very much going to be about the request for additional resource. Information readily available, we'll provide it. Councillor Dave.
Okay. So going back to we've all heard about the workload of Lgfa requests generated by them. Are we not better off to err on the side of just giving people what they want without going through the whole Lgfa rigmarole? If someone has a Lgfa request, just ring them and say, hey, we'll give that to you anyway, don't worry about Lgfa. Tell us exactly what you want and we'll give it to you, and save everyone time.
So firstly, the Lgfa process is actually about getting information out faster, not slower.
I thought it was about holding it for 21 days.
I'll make that really clear today. I know that you all got slight tongue-in-cheek when you're saying that, but there are members of the community and probably elected members that believe it is holding for it as long as you can. It's actually the opposite. One of the things we found, and I don't even like the term Lgfa, we've just got an information management approach. We have a situation where members of the community and elected members request information and it gets lost for more than 20 days in the organisation. So what David's team does is try to corral information and effectively project manage the outcome as quick as we can. The very first thing we do, we identify whether the information is readily available on our website and we send a link to it. Here, go trawl through it, find what you need. Go to the minutes, they're in the minutes. When it becomes a requirement to go digging, and this is not a disparaging comment about staff, but when you've got multiple priorities and someone requests a little bit of information that you've got to go find, and sometimes it can get lost. So the Lgfa process isn't onerous for the sake of being onerous. It's basically a portfolio management tool to make sure we get back to you as quick as we can rather than wait the 20 days. Legally, we're not allowed to use the 20 days as an excuse. We've got to go as hard as we can. So we try to do that. Councillor Dave.
That's very pleasing to hear. Thank you. But so the next question relates to...
Can I just, before you go on to
Sure.
the next question, Dave, just that filter, and you've made the comment that, you know, that might end up being solely management who decides what's important and what isn't. I'm hoping that management will come back to us as part of this review with some solutions to that. And one of the thoughts I had is that if it is of interest, to find out if it is of interest to the rest of the elected member group, it might be filtered through the chairs, that the chairs might be involved too in terms of you know, helping management decide if it requires significant financial resource, that the chairs might also be involved before the work's actually started.
And likewise the general manager as well. And one of the things we're trying to do is get the GM chair relationship, not like that, like this, working together, because we do find that not all staff in a group fully understand the context of the information requests, and sometimes it needs to go to the senior members either on the elected member side and the staff side to get that focus right. And that's probably the filter at that level, collectively understand the context to make sure we give the right information. Because the last thing we want to do is bring information back to elected members that doesn't meet the question, because then we've got to go back again and it's just inefficient.
And quite often, if we misunderstand and we don't get back to elected members, we're doing a whole lot of work that wasn't required because the question was actually relatively simple. So what Richard said is exactly how we want to approach it.
Yep, so that all sounds sensible. Now, on to more specifically the amount. I've been trying to find out the amount of work involved in answering the interminable tax-funded union, New Zealand tax-funded unions requests, Lgfa requests, including the most recent one on ducks, or maybe there's been more since then, I don't know. I've seemed to have had a lot more trouble getting that information than the tax-funded union had in getting its own initial information. Is there a sort of an explanation for that?
I'm not sure where that's at, but I can follow it up for you.
Yeah, so the difference is that was a specific request from them about one specific event. We're just going back through the system, looking at the various engagements we've had from the taxpayer unit, and there are many specific requests as well as general requests across all local government. And so we're just working through the register that we have. And in some cases, Councillor Dave, we hadn't actually recorded the hours associated with it. So we might be able to provide an estimate, or we might just have to leave that blank for you to just gauge from the context of the request how much effort was involved.
Thanks. Because it would be, in terms of fishing, I think you mentioned the word fishing expedition at one stage. It appears that some of the, or scattergun approach, I think as well, that those requests, a lot of requests, not just theirs, maybe scattergun, same question to every one of 69 councils.
That is it's either, or we get requests by one council, by councils in the Waikato, if it's a request from certain media outlets that have a Waikato base, all of New Zealand from various organisations, whether it's ratepayer associations, LGNZ and so forth. So they all have an approach to requesting information. How it's used probably determines its value.
So some of those questions are from journalists, are they not?
So yes, we record the requests on the register. However, our approach with journalists is generally because there's an article that is getting written and we need to make sure all the facts are included in that article. We try to let the comms team manage that directly.
So avoid Lgfa, just speak directly sort of thing?
No, every request of council is actually subject to the Local Government Official Information Act. We just have one point of reference for the media ones to ensure that we meet the overall outcome that we're trying to pursue and they are trying to pursue.
So would you hazard a guess and say that journalists perhaps are using those official requests too often as opposed to the old style of ringing up someone and just asking them the question?
And to be honest, my approach with the media is have a conversation is far better in the best of time. But however, it's really hard to communicate an entire spreadsheet of information via the media. We'd have to sit down with about 3 or 4 hours to read through every column, so providing documented evidence supports that a little bit better.
So the short answer is it's going to get worse before it gets better by the sounds of it.
Well, just to be said, David and Murray, who's in the room somewhere, are leading an approach trying to put as much stuff on the website as possible. And we have organisational strategy, which I'm going to bring to the elected members at some stage, we want to be radically transparent, and we deliberately chose the word radically because we want to actually step it up from the ho-hum lagoima, which is a base level of information, to actually putting anything up and everything up and enabling the community to use tools that we can provide to actually draw some insights from it. So that's the goal. So that's the long-term answer. In the short term, David's team and Michelle are doing an amazing job coordinating, getting these things out better. And we want to start recording the time it takes to respond to requests as well, so we can report to you guys as the elected wing and say, hey, look, we are improving in this space. But in the end, if someone rings up and has a question, and rings me and asks a question, I try to answer it straight away because it's polite, right? So manners apply here as well. If the media rings up and asks for a question, I try to respond as well. If the elected members ring up and ask for a question, I try to respond as quick as I can as well.
Yep. No, that's good. Thank you.
And Councillor Dave, my comment in the report about perhaps trying to get the discipline back into management around keeping some time records of the time that's spent on some of the bigger assignments, even developing budgets,
Yes,
which we used to get with most reports, and they've kind of gone silent in recent times. I'm hoping that we can get that discipline back into the organisation too and do that. Thank you for your questions. Mayor Paula.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just interested in the procurement, actually, primarily, and whether at the same time as factoring in that buy local, how you're looking at the weighting, costs, because we've been very cost driven. How's that going, Max? And I just thank you for your work, because I think it's a really important area we can make improvements in.
Thanks, Mayor Paula. Thanks for your question. As with Margaret's question, it's very early days in terms of being able to change the numbers that sit within it. Certainly, cost is really important to us as an organisation to ensure that we are spending our money wisely and doing that in a way that is also takes account of local is really important to the conversation that's been happening in that group. And currently it's at around 5%, and the feeling of those that sit around the table is that we could increase that in order to be able to think about what that buy local looks like in terms of increasing that weighting. Now, it may be in fact that some of the larger jobs that we have and the larger projects, that kind of a model isn't wise. And in fact, the Waka Kotahi, who set some of the rules, don't allow some of that. The useful thing, though, in that conversation is to be able to see what a local content might look like. And if that is, in fact, an organisation that has an office in Hamilton, that employs local people in Hamilton, that sources product from in and around Hamilton, then all of those factors can be discussed and measured in that way.
That's clear. And the only other thing is we've got these new 5, well not new, but newish 5 wellbeings. So if does the ability to deliver against multiple wellbeings also increase the likelihood of success in a tender, or?
At this stage, there's some real intention to update the procurement strategy to include those types of wellbeings. Absolutely.
So if you need more than 1, 2 or 3, then you've got.
Well, then it helps to build your case, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Could sorry, Mayor Paula, I've got to add on to that question.
Oh, where are you? Paula. Sorry, hello. I've got my reading glasses on today.
I'm going to add on to that question answer, if I could add it, Mayor Paula. Yep. So one of the things I've done is done a mild restructure and have, through our strategy, have Chris leading our procurement or strategic procurement phase. And one of the reasons I've done that is because he has the largest single spend. I think one of the other aspects is you can add on any aspect of wellbeing or local procurement, whatever you want to achieve through a procurement process. The later you add it in, though, in terms of your engagement with the community, the higher the costs are. So the best way of achieving not only all those outcomes and the best value for money is to try and engage in the decision about what you're trying to achieve as early as possible. So what I'm saying is, rather than having a fully baked solution, like we're going to go off and set a tender to buy 10 widgets, having those involved and setting those principles right down at the very beginning before we even decide we need 10 widgets, well, you just want to solve the problems of the city, and this is the particular area we are. We could use 10 widgets, we could use 5 of those, 6 of those, enables you to actually have a better cost-benefit outcome, because you're actually letting the market make a better statement about the risk associated with those decisions and build that in as they progress. So what we need to start doing, I think the key message is more innovative procurement techniques to couple into what Maxine's Councillor Van Erston's talking about, to get the best value in terms of well-beings, but also the best value in terms of price. So the earlier, the better, and setting our expectations will get better outcomes from the procurement process.
Okay, thank you. Another just a question on the report in general, just around these costs. Thank you, Chair, for alerting us to the fact that the costs that sat behind requests used to be easier to find. I think that's really interesting. I'm always interested in the solutions, because we know that the costs are going up, and we know that elected members are part of the request system, not the entire request system. What can be achieved to bring this under control, and is the mechanism of coming through the Chair and General Manager the most appropriate way of making sure that work that isn't approved by the whole of Council doesn't get advanced ahead of priorities? That's what I'm hoping that this review, between management, and I also put you in there too, would sort of come back with, some sort of solutions, but solutions more towards efficiency rather than eliminating any particular requests that might not interest either management or the chair or whoever might be involved in what Dave called that filter process. I agree. Yes. I wasn't trying to stop people asking for things, that information and things, but to be honest, we all know that there are a billion requests. We're in the LTP, a billion requests come in all the time. I see them. Can we have this or that, or another meeting, or another brief shop, or a briefing, or whatever? And it's really good to see that passion and drive, but it does put the organisation on its knees a bit when they have to stop what they're doing to now go off in a different direction. So getting some clarity from our governance wing, how we can best work with staff to support their work, and also to bring our wishes in at the appropriate time through the appropriate way. That's what I'm seeking advice on. Please. Yeah. You can make a brief comment now if you like. Yeah,
absolutely. I think the process is about streamlining. It's about making sure that we put all this effort into the strategic principles, that there's a clear basis for ensuring that the work request ties into those. And the other aspect is, if there is, and it's not about saying no, it's about saying this is what it's going to cost, and if it does cost this amount, maybe we need to go talk to the chair or the mayor or whoever's responsible and bring it back through a committee to ensure that it's actually got the full support of council as well. I mean, it's a death by 1,000 cuts. Some requests may cost $10,000 worth of additional work in the organisation. Might be a couple of weeks of staff not doing something else. So elected members want to manage their scarce resource. In this case, the scarce resource is staff, and we want to make sure you get full opportunity to have those decisions, Mayor Paula.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, Deputy Mayor Taylor, did you have a question? I think your hand's gone down, but it was up.
Yeah, my question got answered some time ago.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Councillor Martin.
I think you've more or less answered it. So I would go to governance, and as you know, I've done, wanting to access old minutes, and when all it was just pressing the time band on diligence old minutes, where I was trying to look for consistency or inconsistency of voting records in the previous term of council. Childcare allowance was an example. So that's sort of straightforward. But if I'm actually doing a deep dive, I just want to, and I think this is a good report, if I want to do a deep dive and suddenly there's a dollar thing, so just if I'm an ordinary elected member, right, which I am, of course, and I want to ask a series of questions, I have been absolutely for quite some time, a series of questions Now, for example, I'll give you an example. In the old days, and I think before Richard's time, we actually had a dedicated researcher who worked with senior management and councillors, and she did a fantastic job. That position was disestablished, no consultation, zero with elected members at the time, and I think it was in a previous administration. And a lot of the work, you know, that was just a normal doing the library search, or I'll go to the Hamilton Library on sort of historical stuff into the heritage founders, that kind of thing. That sort of dedicated resource is not necessarily there. So I'm just, give me kind of an example where something would need to be referred to a GM or a chair. I'm just trying to get the level.
Well, I think that's what in my report, that's what I think I'm hoping will come out, and it may be that the kind of input that you've just given us might be something that management might consider, whether it's the re-establishment of that person to act as the front desk, if you like,
because I think there's something straightforward. Because, for example, I think I did a query into the demolition of the Heritage Founders Theatre cost, but it seems occasionally I get a sort of a legoima at the top of, and I'm an elected member, and I'm not, this is not and I'm saying, how does that work? I'm an elected member, and it wasn't a legoima request, but I'm getting a legoima kind of response. Through the chair, how does that work? Is that just to put everything in the one box? Or?
So just to start again, is any piece of information requested by anyone, including elected members or other staff, to be in that matter, it meets the definition of requirements for a legoima, but it's not a process to slow things down, Councillor, or regular Councillor Gallagher. Councillor, the Chair, is absolutely correct. Through this process, we want to understand what the best way forward is to ensure that the needs of this councillor are met and are transparently done so, and the associated costs in doing so are identified as well. That's the goal. And we try not to slow things down, but when we did have the researcher on board, what we found was much of the information was requested from that individual, which was done brilliantly because she coordinated it all, could also have been gained from other people in the organisation as well. So it's about using the best resource and the best way to achieve those outcomes, and that's what Councillor Rob is suggesting that we bring back through to this committee or to council as a better mechanism to identify and make it easier for you guys to make those sort of requests and know full well that you have the support of the council in doing so.
So that's a roadmap, and that's really helpful. But if, for example, an elected member asks a question which may or may not be perceived as politically embarrassing to the organisation or to elected members, where's the sort of appeal? Because there's a cost thing, I get that, but all I'm wanting is an absolute independence of arbitration, and ultimately the chief executive to me is the neutral arbiter in terms of resource, right? And if a person doesn't, so what I'm looking for is a process, and if the individual elected member is not satisfied by that process, the automatic right to go back to colleagues.
I think you have that right through the chair to request the item you put on an agenda to get a resolution to progress with the work as well. If it's significant enough that it's going to cost resource, and I have to say, hey, we can't afford to do that at the moment, then it's significant enough for you to put it on an agenda and seek permission through a resolution to progress. So. What I think we're trying to do is not say, no, you can't make these requests. What we're trying to do is develop a framework by which you have the confidence you can achieve these outcomes, the costs are identified, and in you doing that request doesn't impact on the delivery of other outcomes as well. So the work will be led by David and Michelle from a governance, from a governance perspective, and Michelle from a legoima perspective, and Sean Hickey and his team from a strategic perspective, because as an elected base, you put a whole lot of work into your 5 priorities. We want to make sure everything ties up to that as well. Then what will come back is a very clear process. It'll pick up Councillor Rob and Mayor Paula's concern about lack of cost identification. It'll make sure everything's transparent. And at that point then you can argue from whether or not you believe it's the process will achieve your outcomes, and we can tweak it accordingly.
Yeah, just what I'm looking for, this is genuine, is that in any council that the final independent arbiter is the chief executive, neutral public servant, and then the final fallback for the elected member would be just to go back to the chamber. Is that a good summary?
And to be honest, councillors, there's seldom been a situation where I've said no to requesting information. What I've set down, I've always had an adage, nothing's impossible, some things are just impractical. I've always provided a way forward of getting it. Just I've asked it for some consideration for the resource requirements, or who to talk to, who to leave alone, and so forth. So it's probably just codifying what we're already doing with a bit more transparency and making sure that we know what's going on.
That's most helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I don't see any further questions on the board, so I will move that the Chair's report be received. Maxine will second. Thank you, Councillor Maxine. Is there any debate? There being none, let's go to the board for voting. And if those on Zoom could give us a show of hands.
Hemi, have you voted? The motion is carried unanimously.
Thank you. All right, let's move on to item number 13, which is the Steel Performance Solutions contract extension. And either Lance or Richard.
I'm going to move up here to feel important. When I first started as Chief Executive, I looked at the various bases that we could drive performance in this organisation. One thing I identified was, I think at the time we had 16 different leadership providers doing different pieces of work. And what I set about doing with a request for tender and approval from Council was to consolidate down that to one provider to drive high performance, and that was Steel Performance Solutions, and it's been in place for the base contract plus 2 years of rider renewal, and it's now time to renew that contract. However, I'm very much aware that the Chief Executive's contract is due to be re-advertised very soon, and I don't want to commit either myself, if I'm successful, or other candidates who are successful in that approach, because ultimately the choice of leadership framework is one that is quite personal to a Chief Executive and their perceptions, their experiences in terms of how they believe they can get the best out of an organisation. So really what I'm asking today is to approve it. It'll provide a 1-year contract to this time next year, June actually. The challenge will be that provides enough time for the current provider to continue. It also provides enough time for the Chief Executive at that point in time to make a decision to continue with it, or to then politely roll out another approach as well, easily roll out another approach as well. And happy to take any questions. Oh, and it's fully budgeted. Oh, sorry, and it goes to February. Sorry, I was misreading the report date.
It goes to February of 2022.
Yeah, which provides a suitable length of time for any Chief Executive to make a call about how they want to approach this particular aspect of leadership, Mr. Chair.
Okay. I don't see any questions on the board, so I will move the staff recommendation. Do I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Ewan. Is there any debate? No debate. Okay, well, we'll move to the board for voting, please. Yeah, could those on Zoom please indicate whether they are voting for or against?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, Margaret, can you indicate whether you're voting for or against the motion? Thank you. All right, let's move now to the Capital Monitoring Report, which is item number 7. Thanks, Ian. Welcome. Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Through the Chair, good morning, Worship. I'm here today to present the Capital Portfolio Monitoring Report for the 7 months ended 31st of January 2021. As always, this report has to be read and considered in conjunction with the annual monitoring report and the financial strategy monitoring report, which Tracy will present after this report. We have, based on the suggestion at the previous meeting, we have changed the presentation of the executive summary and brought a lot more detail in there. So I'll just talk through the main points and then we'll have you take any questions. Actual expenditure at the 7-month period for capital expenditure was 122.9 million, and that's against the current end of year forecast of a 286.8 million program. What I will do at that point is the chair asked for me to provide a little bit of clarity around the total capital budget for the year and how it's arrived at. And what I'd like to do at this point is just draw your attention to attachment 3. I'm sorry, I don't have the page number. Attachment 3 gives a comprehensive summary of how the budget, how we arrive at that budget today. Of
Page 39 it is.
Sorry?
Page 39.
Page 39, thank you, Councillor Chair, Councillor Rob. And it takes us through the opening approved capital program, as you would find in our published annual plan of 302.8 million. And then, as you'll see there, we move through the various finance committees we've had, being 6th of October, 2nd of December, 16th of February, and today's meeting. And those changes are broken down into the deferrals and brought forwards, other approved changes, impact from the 4 funding agreements, which is dealt with in this current report, and savings target for the year. And that's how we move through to a capital expenditure budget of 286.8 million. And there's at the far right-hand side that those various changes are summarised. So at that point, you can see that at this point in time, after the 7 months, we are approving or requesting approval for deferrals of 33.8 million. So I hope that clarifies that. In addition to that, it's a little bit more detail, but I will just also point you in the direction of attachment 4, which is a far more tabular and granular type report, and it follows the capital projects listing that's common that we publish in the annual plan, LTP, and it just takes you through again the movement at what we refer to as a CE level or the major project level, and you can start to see the detail of that. Again, that one for today is only dealing with the adjustments for this current version of this report. If you were to go back into those prior versions, you would find the same level of detail, and certainly in the agendas from those meetings. As a segue into deferrals, the Chair's also asked to provide you an update on where we believe the end-of-year estimate for deferrals is likely to be. So just to confirm, today, 31st of January, 33.8 million. I said at a meeting, previous meeting of the one before, that work we'd done during the LTP, having a look at it, because it was quite critical that we tried to understand the level of deferrals moving into the LTP and understanding deliverability. We estimated deferrals to be sitting around about the 65 million mark. Staff are still confident that number is the year-end deferrals. But what I am going to say, and I'm sorry if it sounds a little bit like I'm trying to make an excuse, the nature and the size of this program is such that, look, it's possible that if certain things didn't happen and didn't go to plan, that those deferrals could maybe go up as high as 80 to 85 million. I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. We've got a significant land purchase in the current capital program, expected to spend it this year. It is significant. If that was not to happen, for whatever reason, negotiations and that, then that would require a deferral, and it's of significant value, and it would add on top of that. So at the moment, we're assuming it will be spent. If it was not, we'd need to come back and ask for a deferral, and that's where you could start to see those movements. So the staff do actively, and I do mean actively, monitor the capital program for deliverability and ensuring that they understand what needs to happen and by the due dates. So we try to give you the most accurate information in this chamber. Moving on from deferrals, I'd just like to talk about capital work in progress. It's another topic that needs to be given some airtime in this chamber. At the moment, capital work in progress for the year, the same period, is 379.3 million. Yes, that is a significant number, but again, we've got a significant capital program, councillors, so that number is not unusual. The number I want to put your attention towards is the amount of work in progress which we consider to be outstanding. So this is capital expenditure on assets that are currently in service but have not yet been capitalised, and that value is 72.4 million. What I can say on that is that a couple of things have happened since the last meeting. The finance staff have done a great job in doing a complete overhaul of our work in progress reporting, and you will see from the body of the report that the graphic we're now using to show you the outstanding has changed from previous versions, and that's a result of that. What that data is doing is it's giving staff and managers greater insight into the number and being able to work through it. The other one that's probably more significant is there's been some staff appointments made over the last 6 to 8 weeks whose key role is to resolve the work in progress issue. And in fact, the most recent one was Monday of this week. Someone started in the transportation unit to directly look at resolving the outstanding work in progress issue. So again, our end goal remains that number is reduced, and it is not an audit issue come 30th of June 2021, because that's just not acceptable for any party. And I think I've said it before, and I'll just reiterate that the impact of that work in progress number on the financial performance of the organisation is it understates your depreciation, which in turn overstates your profitability on your P&L, your operating statement. The other part of the report is we've got our 8 programs that we summarise for you and give you the key highlights of what the deliverability is happening in those space. We also list any projects within those programs where we believe there's a risk. Just to confirm, that risk could be a cost risk, could be a timing risk, could be a scope risk. At this point it is just a risk, and we're just again making you aware of what they are. There's currently 8 within the 8 programs, and they're summarised within the body of the report. I have clarified in this version of the report that we've had, since the beginning of this year and since the annual plan was put into place, we've got 4 significant funding agreements now in place. And they are, in summary, that's the Te Awa Cycleway, that is the 3 water reform stimulus package, and Ruakura package 1 and 2. Now, those packages are significant in value in terms of capital delivery, but they also bring significant capital revenue with you, and those are now embodied and embedded within council's budgets and have been flown through into the financial strategy, which is the third report on the agenda today. Finally, I think it is finally, since the last time I sat here, the country had a COVID level change. We went to 2, Auckland went to 3. We know from previous occurrences of that sometimes brought some cost pressure to council from contractors. To date, we've had no advice from any of our contractors that lockdown will have any upward movement in contract prices or contract costs as a result of that. But having said that, it is potentially still early days in that respect, and staff are actively keeping a clear and open dialogue with the contractors in that respect, but right now, no cost associated with that. I think on that note, I'm happy to say that and take any questions.
Thanks, Ian. I have questions from Councillor Bunting.
Thank you, Chair Rob. Thanks, Ian, for that. Good to see you. My question is around deferrals. It's a constant bane in everybody's life, I'm sure. Is there anywhere in your thinking as a group when a project comes up and it's, oops, we can't do it, it's too big, we haven't got it done in time, is there a place in which you say, and I'm thinking regarding some of the projects we've got in here that are interim measures anyway, re-looking at the problem and saying we could do it a little bit cheaper, a little bit smaller scale, thereby keeping the timing up? And I guess it's reasonably obvious. I'm looking at one of the intersections I'm particularly interested in, and I notice it's quite a big lob of work that we've got into the LTP. But is there any point in your thinking where we go, actually, well, instead of that solution, let's just go with a couple of lines or a barrier or something smaller to get us over? Chris, at what point do you think about that sort of stuff? Because I don't recall that option coming back to us in my terms.
Yep, I'd probably a couple of answers to that. I think one of them we spoke about at the last meeting was pipelining new projects forward. So if we're not completing some projects, can we bring planned projects forward?
Yeah.
So we do have the opportunity to do that, and we do that.
Yeah.
We are certainly looking in the development of the next 10-year plan for a slicker and better way to do that.
Yeah.
Something along the lines like you've allowed us to fund the renewals and compliance as a 3-year program. It would be good to have that as sort of approach to the whole capital program, so we are working on that. The second part of your question, I guess, is strikes at the core of our transportation unit in terms of safety on the network. So I think we're continually looking for the optimum solution and using our low-cost, low-risk program to do sensible solutions that improve safety all the time. So,
I guess what I'm trying to get towards is, everyone talks about the great, and I don't want to dig too deep into the weeds here, the great Pyro experiment with that little concrete roundabout they did, whereas our solution seems to be a lot more big scale. So does that interim yet safe solution creep into your thinking at times?
Yeah, there's an element of are we gold plating our solutions to your question? Look, I don't.
I'm certainly not trying to make it look like that way. I'm just sort of suggesting that are we problem focused enough rather than outcome focused? So, right, here's what we're trying to do: make this place safer. We can't do it for the big project that we'd like to do, the optimum project, which would be ideal. Can we do it in a smaller way?
Yeah, look, I like to think that we do take that approach, and we're happy as staff to be challenged on that. And I think this council does pretty well in its innovative thinking and how it does address some solutions, but we're happy to be challenged by elected members on that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, no, and I certainly wasn't criticising.
No, I didn't take it as a criticism.
Thank you.
Yeah, and sorry, if this is helpful, I mean, look, at no point would anyone ever be encouraged to change the scope of a project simply to meet a time frame or a deliverability around that. I mean, ultimately, at the end of the day, it's about the optimum solution for the city and for the ratepayer. But sometimes in going through a project and as it evolves, an alternative solution comes along or a change in scope does come along late in a piece that you can do at that point. But we would never change a project or a scope simply to meet a deadline or a time frame.
Whereas sometimes it actually is appropriate to do that if you've got an impending problem that you need to fix that we hadn't planned for.
So Councillor, if I could, and it's probably the example you're thinking of, but Puketaha intersection. So look, our scope for that one was a big intersection with 4 legs, and where we're moving to at the moment is the interim roundabout. So that is a result of interaction with elected members to come up with something that will meet the safety requirements, but it's not quite the big scope that we thought we were going to do when we first started. So there's an example, I think, of dynamic thinking betwing staff and elected members.
Yeah, and I think that's the point I was trying to make. I'm sorry it's taking too long, but is there an interim thing? Because the feedback I'm getting is, we want something fixed, but wow, $3 million. Is there a way of doing something for less, for smaller? That's all I'm asking. But that's probably an offline discussion from here. But thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Mark. Mayor Paula.
Thank you. Mark's asked a couple of my questions, which I suppose is about scale of delivering capital projects and what we could potentially do there versus future-proofing that spend so that you don't end up spending more later, which is a bit of a conundrum. So we're just about to, it's interesting to see this now because we're just about to head into the LTP and start deliberating on the proposals we've set out to the public. So my question is, David, sorry to direct this at you, but in terms of how we bring this knowledge of what's happening in the capital projects area into our decision making at the LTP when we're setting the size and scope of the project investment that we're doing. Did that make sense? It made sense in my head. So on that one hand, this is what's here. This is telling us as it is what we know about the cost, the true cost of capital projects, and how deferral and there's maintenance budgets built in further out, etc. So that's what telling us what we know. Now we're going into a what we want for the community scenario. Intersections, doesn't really matter, road upgrades, road extensions, all of those kind of things. How do we bring those two things together in that process? to get to land in a place where it's just truly affordable. I'm not trying to be difficult. I am trying to.
No, not at all. Part of the deliberations we'll be discussing what we already have set aside debt for in our capital program, and if there were new items that you wanted to bring to those conversations, we would obviously need to check our debt headroom, and if we could not extend to those projects as well, we would have to make decisions about which projects are going to replace the ones you want to bring in.
Right.
And if I may, Paula, so remember the other thing that I talk about during the long-term plan is changing things like the interest rates and depreciation rates and a couple of those things as we go through each of this process, and this is exactly why. So obviously after each council meeting there's different council decisions that we have to take into consideration. The deferrals number changes, which changes the cash flow, and also changes depreciation and interest and those sorts of things. So that's what my team are constantly doing behind the scenes, is updating that, and so we'll bring forward all of that updated information before you start then going back through some of those things that you've talked about as well.
So our lens for looking at some of the work that we propose might change accordingly?
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay, that's, the timing is an interesting one, isn't it? Just in respect to that then, I would like to understand the question may not be answered now, but if through you, Mr Chair, to be brought forward, is we want to get in. We've made it quite clear as a council that we want to depreciate assets properly. We want to maintain and renew assets properly, and we don't want to be closing any facilities or assets in this long-term plan. So we'll be asking for, given the trends in some of the costs, I will be asking for assurance that we've hit that mark properly by the time we get to the LTP, that we have a full understanding of what that looks like. So we don't end up in 10 years' time in a situation that we have been over the last 6 or 7 years with a couple of assets. There's no blame, it's just avoidance. And question though, in terms, so that's a question for that LTP where we converge the two conversations. Another question is though, in terms of what we know about the construction index price, transport index, lack of labour to conduct capital projects, there's a lack of civil engineers, there's a lack of builders, there's a lack of trained people, to glazers, steel workers, a whole heap of bunch of things. Want to get to a point where I can be certain that we're not going to have to delay projects too far because of those other aspects, that we've hit that understanding quite well, because the more we delay, the more the costs go up. And then, all of a sudden we're in a catch-up with higher costs. So those indices are really important to me. I know people talk about inflation or CPI or whatever as indices to measure against, but there's a lot of other indices and some of them are rocketing up.
Is this the longest question? I'm just...
It might be.
I thought I've got a limited lifespan. I'm wondering if there's any chance.
She's trying to beat your record.
Yeah, no.
We've got the
we'll leave the
question.
brevity the crown to Ryan. He's always on point there. But no, the question is that is the question: is are we factoring those things in here?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Funny.
So you've had a very
There's so much going on in my head. What can I say?
quick answer.
Did you hear my answer?
No.
Yes.
Oh, I'll keep you to that, Mr. Bryant.
Okay.
Would you like an outline of the inflation increase over the last 5 minutes of that question?
Brilliant. You wait till you get into the LTP team.
Right. Councillor Margaret.
Excuse me. Page 18, I'm looking at the work and balance by status diagram or little pie graph, whatever it is in front of it. I'm just a little, can you explain to me why there is so much outstanding expenditure, particularly in the level of service and renewals? And I understand deferrals, a lot of it depends on timing and contracts, etc., but I'm particularly interested in the level of service. outstanding quantum, because it's actually quite a lot compared to let's say, growth graph, which is fantastic to see that we're actually moving in the right direction there. But it's sort of a bit of a narrative around the renewals and level of service and the outstanding expenditure there, please. Particularly level of service, because that's really important for our customers.
Yes, it is, and as we've said, we've got that 72 million, which is genuine outstanding WIP, and it's something that staff are very concerned about and very conscious of and are working towards. What you tend to find, particularly with the renewals and level of services, the nature of those projects, the smaller projects have got more complexity. They need to go through our asset management systems and be broken down to the appropriate component levels, whether they be linked back to as-built plans, just to get that level of detail, so that when the assets actually come onto the asset register, we are recording them at the right level and appropriately with the right useful life. And it's just the nature of our business, Councillor Margaret, that sometimes it's a lot of money, but equally sitting underneath that lot of money is a lot of individual asset components that need to be recorded at the correct and appropriate level. It's not as simple as I'm buying a car and I've got one asset to capitalise. I might be doing an upgrade, and it may have multiple facets in there that need to be recorded at the right level, not just for the asset depreciation issues, but for the asset management planning going forward, so that we have the right level of plans for renewal and maintenance and operation of those assets. And that's really where it becomes a complex exercise to take the capital expenditure and convert it through into the asset register.
Okay, but just from my understanding, could you give me an example of, without having to wade through all those pages of reports, but an example of one of those projects and levels of service, then please, that's outstanding?
Oh, I'm going to struggle off the top of my head to do that. But I mean, like in the renewal stuff, that could be a renewal of an individual project, so it could be the replacement of a building roof, or it could be renewals within a program of work. So we're renewing the resale on the transportation network or the curb and channel, and that's all got to go down. That's got to be capitalised at the individual levels. A level of service project. I'm sorry, I'm just struggling to think of an example off the top of my head that would qualify. I don't know if somebody can. No.
Yeah,
I mean,
in my mind, level of service means, okay, we're offering a service of sort, and, you know, when we've got outstanding as much as what we have at the moment, there's almost a quarter of that graph of the 28.4 mil, then I'm just thinking, well, why are we dragging the chain there?
So look, I've just picked up the attachment 4, Councillor Margaret, which is the capital list of capital projects. And look, this is what we've published annual plans, LTP, and in that table you'll see third column along, we classify the expenditure in that table there between the renewal, the level of service and the growth, so you start to get an indication of what those projects are. And the one I've just picked up out here is under Parks and Recreation, level of service program would be the playground development program. Where we are upgrading and improving the level of service within that area.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate the explanation. Point 32, the Wairoto Drive extension Cambridge to Cobham classified as orange, and it sounds like it's going to be ongoing orange as well, but the significant remaining risks include below ground work by the bridge. Yes, I understand that completely, and traffic management. What's the risk around traffic management?
Yep, if I can pick that one up. So look, as we know, it's a complex project and got lots of risk, and sort of my decision to just keep it orange. So there's a conversation with councillors every month on the project. Things are going well with the project at the moment since we've resized it. If you drive past there, you'll notice our risk in terms of below ground works is reducing. There's piles coming out of the ground now, which is great. So we're mostly above ground in sort of more known territory. The traffic management is just the significant amount of changes we've got to do to take the vehicles off the tortuous sort of routes that they're travelling now as they're going along on-ramps and off-ramps and put them back onto the main traffic way. So that's always a risky part of the contract, and just getting that right and making sure all the traffic moves smoothly.
Okay, so you mean a health and safety type risk, or you mean risk that we're not going to get things done on time around that traffic management?
Sort of both. Look, I'm not indicating that we have got problems there. We're just indicating that it's one of the riskier parts still of the project, which could incur unexpected costs. So we're not expecting that at the moment, but it's up there, and the risk schedule is one of the higher risks.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for that. I know it's a little bit of detail, but I'm just trying to understand, well, why would traffic management be a risk? And last question, point 33, just around go with Cco extension. Again, risk is around approval, yes, understand, but contract performance, I thought we had a very good contract there in place. So what's the risk around that?
Yes, I don't want to say too much at this meeting, but there are just some signs of some concerns we have in that area. So we're just working on that at the moment.
Okay, perhaps a little more detail on PX, and if you kind of go into any more detail now.
I'll pick that up in an executive update, if I may.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chris. Thank you.
Margaret. Councillor Ryan.
Thanks, Chair. Just a few questions. Ratatuna Village Transport Stage 1, the risk now because of the National Policy Statement on fresh water with the Regional Council. What's the likely delay on that one? I assume that's to Chris as well.
Yeah, so this is a pretty significant issue for us. So effectively, if you keep it at a simple level, it's very difficult now to move streams or farm drains because of ecological issues. So in Rotatuna, we've got some existing drains to move. So we don't have a solution for that, but we are sort of teaming up with our growth team through Luke and others, and meeting with Regional Council and some developers to try and find a way through it. To be fair on Regional Council, it's a new national policy statement that requires some interpretation, and there's just different interpretations being taken at the moment. So the delay on this project is pretty significant. In terms of developing the Rotatuna village, it's probably not that significant, but it is the Turakina Rise project is one that is required at some point in time, but the delays are quite significant at the moment.
What's your approximate estimate on delay, total time?
I think it could be 12 months.
Okay. And below that, Resolution Drive, was this one, I forget the term you used, Chris, but where you try and bake in a fixed cost or fixed price? Was this the one where the onus is on NZTA to deliver? Because you mentioned they're going to likely come back to us.
Yeah, so that's certainly our position. We entered into a contract with Waka Kotahi some time ago to build the extension for us on a fixed price lump sum contract basis. There are some questions and challenges about the scope of that project at the moment, which we're working through. So in a simple sense, we think the scope's a certain size. NZTA or Waka Kotahi are probably trying to reduce the scope.
Okay, and Newcastle Water Reservoir, what does that mean? There's a risk associated with market price. Does that mean they've come in higher than we've anticipated?
Yeah, it's a very difficult project to judge the market price or the tender price, because this is a project which is putting pipes in existing roads and digging up existing roads. So it's quite a significant, over $10 million project. So just with the timing of it, we thought it prudent to just flag it as a potential risk in there until we had the tender prices and understood what the market price was.
Thanks. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Dave.
Thanks. Sort of following Margaret's question, and particularly about the Wairere Drive extension on page 36 there, you're talking about the project still has a number of significant risks to manage, and I'm wondering whether this is to Chris actually, whether Chris you're taking account or much account has been taken of the risk that the congested area at the top of Hillcrest Hill with the two roundabouts, particularly the first smaller one, will put any advance achieved through the Wairere Cobham intersection being completed in jeopardy in terms of its operability. In other words, that the congestion that already flows back over the hill down towards the gardens will increase as the route becomes apparently more direct and usable, and you've finished your roadworks there. We'll for several years be waiting for the old parts to allow the vehicles to get through, and this is at not just at peak sort of transport commuter times, but also nowadays observe right through the day. I'm happy to explain a bit more.
No, sorry, I'm just talking to Robin, who's sitting next to me. So there is a Waka Kotahi project to signalise that intersection.
That's their intersection. I'm talking about both intersections. The top one is ours, is it
The
not?
top one being the Burger King.
No, the one that's at the top is the one that higher up the hill.
The Cambridge Cobham?
Yes.
Yeah, no, that's the Waka Kotahi, that's the state highway. So that's the state highway intersection, which they have a project ready to go to signalise that. We've just got ongoing discussions about the timing of that to tie in neatly with the Cobham Wairere project.
Oh, that's good, because that's the particular concern.
Yeah.
First of two concerns. So the plan is to have them working at the same time.
Yeah, so I'll get Robin just to answer that if I may.
So the timing at this stage is we need to get Wairere Cobham basically complete before they climb in there, because what we're wanting to do is to limit the traffic going through Cambridge Road. So we need to get Wairere Drive operational onto Cobham, so that when they climb into the Cambridge Cobham intersection, there's not that huge amount of traffic that's coming through. So the queues that are happening at the moment is basically traffic coming in from Cambridge, turning right and carrying up Cambridge Road, and that's causing that delay back on Cobham Drive. Once we've got Cobham Wairere open, we'll be trying to push that traffic to stay on the State Highway 1 and go all the way through to Wairere Drive and go up instead of using Cambridge Road.
Could we have a specific report on that and the other roundabout maybe to the infrastructure committee about how it's going to work, because it's been getting steadily worse for 15 years or so up there, and there's also the Morrinsville Road link and the Burger King entrance that are pressure points and accident points, and second later case.
Yep, through you, Mr Chair, I'll pick that up, because I think the issue might even be broader than just the area council is indicating. So it might be the commissioning of the Waikato Expressway and how we're going to open it all up. So I think it's a good discussion to bring back to elected members.
Yes,
yep.
It's being discussed at the next Strategic Growth Committee, the link off the expressway, in the Chair's report.
Right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor Dave. Just one final question from me. I'm just wanting to get my head around the deferral figure. Am I right in, you mentioned the current deferrals, or the deferrals at January meant that the CapEx program at that stage was 286 million from the 302, so we're running about 16 million behind at January, but by June you think that that figure could be 60 million, the 16 million that we're currently seeing as deferred from that $302 million will increase to $60 million by 30 June? Or did I misread that in the verbal presentation?
No, that's right. Just for clarity, At the moment, we've got a total capital program of 286.8 million.
Yeah, but it was originally 302,
It was
wasn't
302, and one of the factors that's resulted in that change in number is that we've currently got deferrals on the table of 33.8 million.
Right, okay,
And
okay.
The number, we estimate this 65 mil, that would mean that we're looking at another 30 mil in deferrals between now and the end of the financial year.
Okay, so there's the carry forwards from the previous year. And the new projects that you've been able to jump in means that at the end of the year, we might be $33 million behind. No, we will be a total of 60 million.
Yeah, just a nice clinical number. The deferral value would be 65-ish.
All right, okay, thank you. All right, so we've got no further questions on the board. I will move that we receive this report. This, of course, is the first report of a trilogy. Do I have a seconder, please? Thanks, Councillor Ryan. Is there any debate on the report? No? Okay, we'll go to the board for voting, please. Sorry? Okay, we could do that, yes, okay. So we'll wait for the voting to come through. Would those on Zoom please raise their hands? They agree or? Yeah.
The motion is carried unanimously.
Item 10, up to accommodate our visitors from our Lgfa. So if we could be back at 11:10, please. Okay, if we can resume the meeting, please. Finance Committee members, we're now moving to item 10, which is the New Zealand Local Government Funding Agency half-yearly report. And I welcome our two guests this morning, Andrew Mitchell, who's been here before, and also Samitha. And I'll ask them, please, to talk to their half-yearly report and the draft statement of intent. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you for inviting us. I'm only proposing to go through 4 or 5 slides, just talk for 5 minutes and then sort of open for questions. So if we can start on page 4, I'll just cover off the recent developments. The single biggest one is Lgfa moving to a AAA credit rating from Standard & Poor's. So that happened probably 3 weeks ago, and that was a result of the government being upgraded to sort of AAA as well. So as Lgfa is seen as a government-related entity, we have the same credit rating as the Crown. But that is positive for councils because it now means the difference between Lgfa and the best rated bank in New Zealand, which is AA-, is now 2 rating notches. So that gives us an advantage in terms of our the interest rates that we can raise debt at relative to sort of banks. So it makes us more competitive versus bank financing. The other thing I'd draw your attention to is the record amount of lending. So far, in the 8 months to February, we've lent 2.1 billion. So once we complete the financial year, we'll be well over $3 billion of loans to councils. So that's really positive in a year we've had the challenges of COVID, that we've been able to do that amount of lending to the sector, which then enables councils to do all the capital expenditure and things that they are currently doing. Membership, we're now up to 71 councils, and Napier are joining in the next week, so that'll give us 72. Another 3, including Dunedin, in the process of joining. So hopefully we'll get the Chatham Islands one day, but we've pretty much got the whole sector, which is fantastic. It isn't compulsory for councils once you remember to use Lgfa, so we still have to remain competitive to support our member councils. And new product initiatives, so we're about to commence Cco Lending, so that mean Lgfa can lend directly to CCOs, but only on where councils guarantee those CCOs. We're only expecting probably 3, so you're going to need a certain amount of scale to do that. We have put in place a green and social and sustainable lending framework. So that's going to mean in the next city year we'll be able to do green and sustainable lending to councils. So if you've got a project that is green, such as a green building, we'll be able to finance that on a green basis. Page 5, just the Lgfa COVID response. So one interesting development last year is we saw the Reserve Bank move to purchase government bonds in the secondary market, and a few weeks after they started doing that, they added Lgfa to that sort of program. So the Reserve Bank's actually purchased 1.7 billion of Lgfa bonds in the secondary market. Why that is, so Lgfa was the only corporate or non-government entity that the Reserve Bank have been sort of purchasing. So it's positive that it showed in a time of a crisis that the central government was prepared to provide additional support to Lgfa so that Lgfa can continue to finance the local authority sector. The other thing the Reserve Bank did last year was increase the standby facility for Lgfa from $1 billion to $1.5 billion and roll it out for a further 10 years. We've never drawn on that credit facility from the government, but again, it was just symbolic that they're extending it for a further 10 years, that there's going to be ongoing support from the government for the local authority sector. And the last thing just on this page to highlight is just we've increased our liquid assets portfolio. So we used to have about 500 million in liquidity. Now it's up to $1.5 billion of liquidity. So again, if we get to another crisis, we've got a lot larger pool of liquid assets that we can sell down to provide ongoing loans to councils. Page 6 is one thing we also did was increase the net debt to revenue covenant. So it used to be 250%, and that's now been increased from 2026, it will be 280%. So it actually goes up to 300% in 2022 and then drops back down. So it's providing a little bit of extra headroom for councils. This is something we had to work quite closely on with S&P to be able to sort of deliver. So we do see sometimes comments in the newspaper saying, well, why don't councils just borrow more? And our response to that is that councils operate in a global world. So credit ratings are global things. So there's a finite limit how much debt that councils can borrow before they'd start getting downgraded. If we went any higher than this, then S&P would likely to downgrade Lgfa, and that would then mean everyone's borrowing cost to the sector, everyone's borrowing cost in the sector would increase. So the model, when we lose our credit rating parity with the Crown, would start to break down a bit. However, councils don't have to remain a member of Lgfa. So if councils did actually want to borrow more than that, they're free to leave Lgfa and then, end up with a lower credit rating. They could be BBB, for example, and they'd do their own sort of financing. So pay more for their debt, but they'd have extra flexibility. The statement of intent, page 7. So we've got the draft statement of intent out there. There's been no change in the primary objectives. In the secondary objectives, the very last one is new. So we've added in there that we're going to assist the local government with significant matters such as the COVID-19 response. So that's largely been done. And the proposed 3 water reforms. So if those reforms progress, then we're going to have to work closely with the government and the council sector sort of to facilitate those changes. And we've got our forecast financials out the side. So again, you can see profits has been stable in recent years at around sort of $10, $11 million. It's forecast to increase slightly over the next few years. That's based on bigger lending to councils. However, we could well lose some lending to the sector as a result of water reforms, in which case our lending book would be lower and therefore our profit would be lower. So that's, like councils, that's all a developing scene. Page 8 is the performance targets in the year to June 2020. So this is a little bit sort of outdated. So I'll just talk about the 2 that were not met. So one was the first one with the cross is just one of our objectives is to visit each council who is a member every 12 months. The last year travel was impacted by COVID, so we simply didn't get out and see every councils, but it's something we're out on the road now, sort of catching up on that. So we hope to meet it in the year to June 21. And we did have 2 Treasury policy breaches. that were reviewed by our Audit and Risk Committee, so there was no financial cost to that, but the systems have been tightened, and since then we've had no further subsequent sort of breaches. And very lastly, page 9, just to give you a little bit of a summary to sort of put profitability in context. So if you look at that top right-hand graph, you can see Lgfa's profit, as I said, has been quite constant at around $11 million. We're on track for it to meet our June 21 forecasts. But just remember, Lgfa's aim is not to maximise its profit. Its main aim is to, which is very different than a bank, it's to deliver cheaper financing costs to sort of councils. So again, if our profit were to jump up significantly, it's probably most likely we would lower our lending margin to councils to pass those profits back to councils. So I will finish there.
Thanks, Andrew. I'll call for questions, and I have a question on the board from Mayor Paula.
Good afternoon. Morning. Sorry. Good morning. I think you may have started to answer my question, but when you were talking about council's borrowings and green projects and so on, the Three Waters is a big area for infrastructure investment, and many councils are going to need to leverage debt to deal with the Three Waters issue that's coming ahead of them. Do you anticipate a greater demand on your services as a result of the Three Water changes? The second part of that is, do you anticipate that you would be, through your statement of intent, you would be prioritising those who were aligned with government direction as opposed to those who, say, opt out of the Three Water arrangement and they want to do their own thing? Different scale, different economy. What's your view on that? Because it could be a heck of a lot of money for New Zealand Inc. It's a third of our rates.
So Three Waters is the single biggest sort of issue that's sort of consuming our time and our board at the moment. We met with the Minister last week to sort of have an update. We've been working very closely with DIA. At this stage, you know, it's looking like the water reforms are going to progress, so the government certainly seems very sort of committed. There's certain things that have yet to be sort of determined as how, you know, debt might be transferred from councils to new water entities. But to answer, I suppose, your question is the role Lgfa will be playing either in continuing to finance just councils or a wider range of entities, which might include the water entities, will be a role for shareholders. So David is a member of the shareholder council, so that is an issue they will be discussing, and I assume giving some direction to the board.
Yes.
At the moment, we cannot lend to the water company under the structure that is proposed, because they won't be a council-controlled organisation or a council-controlled trading organisation. Probably not that if they can't make profits, but so if we were to lend, then we'd have to get shareholder approval to do that, and whether shareholders want us to do that or not is something they will have to decide.
Thank you. I'm super glad I asked that question because David, in terms of strategic direction of the board, what's being proposed is not a CCO. So is it expedient of us in our conversations with government around the Three Waters to point that out, that one of the primary mechanisms for funding would not be available under that new entity model? Is that the question? I mean, did you understand where I'm going? Because we're going to give our feedback on Friday in Rotorua. So.
Yeah, so it's an item that's been well canvassed. I'm sure Lgfa have raised it themselves as well, and it's since the initiation of any form of water reform, the value of increasing the debt of any agency has been raised, and how whether they choose to go through Lgfa or there's other mechanisms that may bring the same level of competitiveness from an interest rate point of view in terms may also be canvassed as well. It may not necessarily be Lgfa, could well be. That's to be decided yet. So, but it has been on the table for a while now.
Yeah, it may be at this level. I'm just trying to raise it up to that political level. What's our message back to government when we're talking about whether we buy into this structure or we don't, it then becomes material as to where we may borrow the money, right?
Yeah,
Am I
so
right?
I think the key message is that whatever entity will be there will have access to funds. They are looking at increasing their debt to revenue to ensure they can achieve some of the backlog in infrastructure and other smaller councils. I think for our position is that the most cost-effective outcome should be required for our communities, which talks to your point, Mayor Paula, about whether or not they will have access to the competitive nature of interest rates. So I think the right message we have to give to on Friday is ensuring that they consider the broader cost effectiveness to our community, because whilst at the moment we manage that cost effectiveness through Lgfa, if they lose that ability, it might in the end be more costly for a third party entity to deliver those services as well.
So I possibly need some help putting that together for Friday. Thank you. The other thing you did mention, and I didn't quite hear the whole sentence, because I probably was still thinking about the one before, Three Waters, green projects. You mentioned your focus on green projects. Can you tell me a little bit about that, please?
Yep, so green and sustainable lending is something that's been growing internationally over a number of years, and we've seen a number of New Zealand entities, such as some of our power generators, power companies, issuing green bonds. So it's as a result of, I suppose, the investor community becoming more environmentally and ethically focused. Councils, I suppose, are seen in quite a positive light anyway, so it's not like we're a coal company or something that you're coming under the microscope a lot more. So even if we don't issue green bonds, there's still going to be a lot of investor demand for council debt. However, if we were to take some green projects and issue them under a green bond, then that would probably be something investors would like to see. So we will work with councils on some of their green and sustainable projects. Unfortunately, if they lose the water assets, that's probably one of the ones that would have ticked a lot of boxes, but there's still going to be a lot of green buildings. There's going to be cycleways, public transport, a lot of things that the larger councils at least will be able to meet those
So
things.
you'll be looking at sort of moving your portfolio to at least a portion of green focus, just like other major global funders and things are doing. Is that right? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and also, having these discussions with councils will give us a lot more knowledge of exactly where money is going to finance. So again, it will be able to answer a lot of investor questions. So just on the water reforms, to put a couple of sort of points, that the water entities are likely to have a much lower credit rating than the council sort of sector. So again, if they're standalone entities, their cost of debt is going to be higher than what councils are able to sort of borrow at. And also the value of their security, they won't have security over rates, it will just be a sort of a water charge. So so they will probably lose some efficiencies from their financing costs. But DIA and Standard & Poor's have confirmed it, that if the water reforms do progress, councils will not be left in a worse position than they are now. So purely from a credit rating perspective, it will mean the council sector, at least initially, will emerge in a stronger state than it is sort of currently. So that's positive from a Lgfa's credit rating perspective.
Thank you. That actually, I'm really pleased I asked that question, because it's given me a lot more knowledge than I had on that before. Because my next question is, though,
So, excuse me, councillors, can you take the conversation away from, please? Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Paula.
in terms of my next question, it is around the end user. So those entities being lower credit rating, having to borrow at a higher financial rate, they still have the ability to charge the end user. So the costs of that go somewhere, right?
Yeah.
So so if you look at what's happening in Auckland at the moment, where their proposed rate strike is the increase is not too big, but it's separate from what Watercare, the increased water user charges that Watercare are going to impose on the same community. So I'm just interested in that, and that could happen. That could happen here. Yes? No? Maybe?
Anything's possible at the moment.
So we've done a lot of work on this sector, in this sort of area, so I'm more than happy to have a further discussion with David or the council, you know, if they want to get our views.
So through you, Mr Chair, some information to help us who are going on Friday, given that we haven't got a lot of time, would be very welcome and useful. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ryan.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for your presentation. Just quickly, I know 6 months ago we talked about you're essentially 0.5% lower than commercial bank lending, and I know it's contextual, depending on the amount of lending and the security of the council. But what's the sort of the midpoint now in terms of the interest rate? Has it dropped in the last 6 months, and is it looking to drop further, or is it fairly stable now?
So I suppose there's sort of two things. There's the outright interest rate that you sort of borrow at, so that's what's happening with global interest rates, and there's the relative attractiveness of different borrowing costs. So would it be cheaper for you to borrow from Lgfa or borrow from a bank or issue your own bonds into the sort of market? So in terms of the interest rate thing, short-term interest rates are low. The Reserve Bank have said they're going to remain low. So Australia, for example, said that their OCR won't change to 2024 at the earliest. So short-term interest rates remain low. Long-term interest rates have been rising significantly over the first 3 months of this year. So long-term interest rates are around 1.5% higher than they were at the end of last year. So depending where you're borrowing on the curve, it might be slightly more expensive than it was sort of 3-6 months ago. But in terms of Lgfa's competitiveness versus the banks and that sort of 50-point margin or saving that you sort of talked about, that saving will differ between councils. So for smaller councils, they're probably saving at least 1% what they could borrow at from the bank. For larger councils like Hamilton, you could issue debt in your own name to wholesale investors. So I suspect that you wouldn't be saving 50 basis points because a lot of investors, as you AA- rated, would have significant demand for Hamilton's debt. So there will be a saving there for you, but it's probably more like 20-30 basis points versus 50.
But is the current lending right now, for example, with councils' volume less than 2%? Can you give me a bit of an indication?
Of interest rates?
Yeah, with Lgfa.
Yeah.
Cost of capital, essentially. Even though I know it's a moving and we've got different quantums fixed at different sets.
Yep, so there's a graph on page 12 that just shows the interest rates sort of curve. So if you borrowed, like for 5 years, just looking at the 2025 bonds, so that's 4 years, then you'd be borrowing at 1.3%, something like that. So pretty cheap in a historical thing. If you borrowed for our longest dated bond, which is 2037, so 16 years, the interest rate's now up to 3%. So it really just depends how long you want to borrow for. If you borrowed for 3 months, then you'd be borrowing, probably at less than 0.5%. So short-term money is very cheap.
Just wondering if we should
do it. Look at again, David might or Tracy can probably comment, but generally when you're looking at your debt costs, you're looking at a whole portfolio sort of approach rather than a single sort of maturity. So if your average term of borrowing is sort of 5 years, then if you started from now, then you could probably get an average interest rate cost of 1.5%. Your current costs will be higher than that because it reflects all the historical debt that you've borrowed up higher interest rates than they are now.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Ryan. Councillor Maxine.
Thank you for that, and thanks for your presentation. I'm just looking at your page 5, I think, where it's got the debt to revenue proposed increases. Great to be able to see that there's going to be headroom for councils and those percentage increases. What does that represent in terms of a dollar figure?
It would differ between councils. So for larger councils, it will be a lot larger amount in dollar terms. So I'd have to look at your revenue number. I don't know that off the top of my head, but you're getting in the long term an extra 30% sort of headroom than you had sort of previously. So we did that. we made the change for a number of reasons, and it's a funny scale because we were worried the impact of COVID might cause council revenue to be a little bit lower than normal in the near years, but we also wanted councils to be able to co-invest with government in shovel-ready projects, so give them more headroom for that. But it also reflects that growth rates are higher than they were thought about probably if you go back 5 years ago. So again, growth councils probably have an ability to borrow a bit more than what they might have done historically.
And then if you were to agglomerate all of the councils and that headroom, might that equate to billions of dollars additional available?
Yeah.
And Lgfa would be in a position to be able to fund that kind of borrowing anticipation?
Yes, so to date we've got sort of around $14 billion of debt we've issued. That's all been issued in New Zealand dollars into our domestic market. If we were to grow significantly more, it's possible we might outgrow the New Zealand capital markets. We might have to go to Australia. Auckland Council, for example, issue in euros. They've done a couple of euro-denominated sort of bonds. It's slightly more expensive if we were to borrow in offshore currency and swap it back. But yeah, certainly capacity to borrow is not a significant sort of issue. So council debt's now around 19 billion. I think in 2007 it was about sort of 4 billion. So again, investors like councils because, you know, they are highly rated. So even relative to banks, you know, they're highly rated, and the security they offer over rates is extremely good. So, and the power to tax as well is extremely, while there are some limitations of political limitations, it's still a very powerful tool compared to most private sector companies can't do that.
And then
just a reminder on that, Councillor Maxine, is that we also have Treasury Advising, our own Treasury, which is done through PwC, who advise us and give us a layer of independence as to Lgfa and what other alternatives might be appropriate from time to time.
Yeah. So Lgfa isn't an advisor, so that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, look, my final question is kind of the opposite of where our mayor was going with her questions around Three Waters, but to do with the impact on councils should those assets be taken off the books, be disproportionate to the revenue that they would lose, and what impact that might have on their debt to revenue ratios, and how that might be managed.
So the water assets generally tend to be more leveraged than other infrastructure assets that councils have. So therefore, and DIA have yet to confirm the methodology on which councils will be able to transfer debt and how much. And some councils just have a big consolidated pool of debts. They don't actually know how much of that relates to water. So if you can sort of make up your own numbers, then of course you try and transfer as much debt as you could. But S&P have confirmed this, that if, you know, all councils sort of transfer their water assets, then councils' remaining net debt to revenue ratio would fall. So that would be good from Lgfa's perspective, from a credit perspective. Yeah.
Just a qualifier on that. If the debt was going to be lower, but their revenue is lower still, might that be able, get that out of balance?
That's right. So the revenue would also sort of fall. So,
but at a disproportionate rate. I recall hearing one of the smaller councils talk about a 20% loss in asset, but a 25% loss of income.
Yes, and speaking to a number of councils, you know, a lot of their debt, 80% might be water related, so they might lose 25% of their revenue, but if you lose 80% of your debt, you'll be left in a better position on what sort of remains. I mean, there is the additional work stream on the future of local government, so for smaller councils and things, probably some implications from whatever that sort of work stream sort of comes out with. But for a lot of the larger councils, you know, without making comments on the merits of the water reforms, it will leave them with a greater ability to focus on sort of community sort of projects and assets. For smaller councils, you know, that's more problematic because they don't, you know, the Three Waters makes up a much bigger proportion of their sort of council functions.
Thank you. Thanks for your clarification. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And look, I don't see any other questions, but I've got a couple here, and I'll start with the waters one, seeing that's topical and across the board, and mention that our rates income, 35% of what we spend goes into our waters. So it's quite a significant figure. But just why would we not end up with a CCO? I mean, I know Auckland's water care is a CCO. The overseas models have typically in Scotland and in Victoria ended up as CCOs as a part of the assets moving in. And I know this is early days, but why would we not end up, why are the signals coming to you, and we might need this for Friday, why are the signals coming to you in the sense that they may not be CCOs, and of course now you can lend to CCOs, you know, the whole picture kind of falls into place.
Yeah, so Scotland is owned by the government in Scotland. In Australia, they're generally owned by the state government. So Tasmania is the exception. So Tasmania is council owned by council, so one water entity. Yeah, so compared to last year, things have moved on a little bit, and it's now a little bit less consultative. You know, in fact, it's almost, you know, the government have said we're going to now determine the model and we're going to tell you what it's going to be, and they really want councils to be the messenger rather than, you know, a true sort of consultation sort of thing. The reason they like to... Or even
a partner in the new water company.
Sorry?
Or even a partner?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So there might be some sort of governance oversight, but there won't be council appointments to the board. They'll be independent boards. I think they're likely to be statutory entities, so I think there's very little chance they'll be CCOs. I mean, not, again, DIA haven't come out with the exact model. The reason why they won't be CCOs is, I think, if you think about Auckland will go in with Northland, and Auckland could own 80% of that if it was a CCO. And then if they're going to be highly indebted for their water entity, the council would have to consolidate all that sort of debt. So the council at a group level would be lumped with all the debt of the water entities. The government want councils to be able to get on and do the other things they need to sort of focus on without having to be lumped with all the debt of the water entities on a consolidated basis. For a lot outside Auckland, the rest of the sector might be able to get away with it, because if you own sort of 5-10% stake in a water entity, you wouldn't have to consolidate it. But at an 80% level, you absolutely would. So yeah, the Auckland scenario is like hugely problematic. So I think it's like, you know, 99% sure they're going to be statutory entities. So like a ACC or a Crown Infrastructure Partners. So no one actually owns them. They're just a statutory entity.
Could be an interesting discussion on Friday then. The other question that I've got is around your monitoring of the other member councils, given that we are, along with some other councils, guaranteeing some of the debts of those councils.
You're not guaranteeing the debts of councils, you're guaranteeing Lgfa's
I guess that potentially flows through, doesn't it? Yeah. So, and you mentioned that you've done 22 of the 71, and the reason for not perhaps getting around this year has been the COVID issues. What processes does Lgfa have in place to monitor and get reasonably quickly indications of red flags that might be happening within individual member councils that might send you off to to investigate in order to protect, the guarantees that are in place from other councils?
So we have a requirement that councils provide a compliance certificate each year in respect of their June accounts. So we've now had, I think, 9 years of compliance certificates. So we've never had a breach of any of the 4 financial covenants. So all councils remain compliant. We also look at all the annual plans and long-term plans. So at the moment, we're looking at all the draft LTPs. So if a council is forecasting a breach, that is also something that will be raised with Lgfa, the CEO of Lgfa and the board and the shareholders council. A little bit complicated this year because of the water issues, because obviously a lot of water capex might not happen, so trying to... and we also have a borrower watch list, so we have 10 councils that we monitor. So additional information on those councils goes to the board. So it allows the board to focus maybe on councils that are either the largest and represent the most risk, so they can focus rather than go through, 71 individual sort of councils, because otherwise you get lost in some of the things that really a council has no net debt, so you don't need to spend too much time on that. But we do look forward and we do report to the Shareholders Council on all the covenant outcomes.
Right. And COVID hasn't raised any red flags, or COVID or the events of the last 12 months have not created any serious issues that, well, I guess if they have, you have presented them through to the Shareholders Council.
It did. But things turned out to be a lot better than was first feared. Okay. So we worked quite closely with DIA and Solgum on preparing a report that was giving advice, was the basis of advice to sort of ministers. So at one stage it was felt that revenue could fall by 10 to 20%, across the sector as a whole. In the end, a few of the larger metro councils have had some impact. So you can see comments from Auckland that they're still struggling a bit with their revenue base. But rural councils had pretty much no impact when we looked at their June sort of 20 accounts. So it's still an ongoing sort of risk, and we will sort of monitor that. But I suspect the government will also, if it got worse again, provide, assistance to councils.
Okay, thank you. And I don't see any further questions, so I will move the staff recommendation that we receive the half-yearly report and that we approve the New Zealand Local Government Funding Agency Draft Statement of Intent 21-22. I have a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Maxine. Is there any debate or discussion on the motion? Okay, we'll go to the board to vote. And ask those on Zoom to raise your hand or indicate otherwise. Great.
The motion is carried unanimously.
Thank you, and thank you very much for your attendance today and for the questions, and much appreciated. Thank you. All right, members of the committee, we now move back to item number 8, which is the annual monitoring report, and ask Tracy to come to the table. Welcome, Tracy.
So I will take the report as read. Hopefully the executive summary that we've included in the report this time covers most of what I would normally do in the presentation. What I thought I would do, though, based on the questions earlier on in the meeting regarding consultants and personnel costs and revenue. So what I would just like to do is, if I can bring the members' attention to page 62, which is just the statement of comprehensive income, the activity statements in particular for the planning and development area. So if we can just look at this in particular around questions earlier, you'll see there, for example, in the professional costs line, we've got an overspend of 519 $1,000. So that's a combination of both professional fees and legal fees, which we know the legal fees is part of the judicial review that we're doing at the moment, as well as the consultants. You'll also see just above that, though, in fees and charges, we've got a variance of the $1.6 million. So again, in particular in this area, you've got favourable personnel costs. Some of those are offset by the consultants, but clearly the fees and charges is obviously twice as much as that. So that's an example of what I was trying to explain before, in particular around just one activity that we have where that shows up. So the other thing to remember, members, is we have things like the Te Awa project, which again brings in extra personnel and consultant type fees, but also brings in the revenue for it. The other one that we'll start seeing a lot more of is obviously water reform. Again, not budgeted for in this year's accounts. We're already doing the work, but we do have obviously that revenue coming through from the government to offset that. So those sort of things go hand in hand. So hopefully that explains that particular question before and makes that a little bit more understandable.
And do those revenue streams, do they offset each other in terms of revenue and expense, or are some of them capital revenues which end up being, and we expense those, so we get a mismatch in terms of our bottom line?
It's a combination of both. So we do have specific capital revenues coming in. So as you know, capital revenue does come through the P&L, and the expenses are obviously sitting in our capital space from a cash perspective. You've got a combination of operational revenue coming in, offset by operational costs. Some of the areas, like for example, events like an H3, most of if you're doing extra stuff, extra events, they'll bring in the revenue, they'll get extra costs. I know sometimes they make a bit of a margin on some of those things, and sometimes they don't, kind of depending on how it's run and what percentage they're getting from those sorts of things. So every one is ever so slightly different.
Okay. Yep. All right. If you've any questions? I keep seeing Kesha's hand up there, but it's not her hand. Okay, we don't have any questions on the report. All right, well, let's go back to the staff recommendation that the Finance Committee receives the report. I will move. Do I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Ewan. Is there any discussion or debate on the annual monitoring report to 31 January? There is none. Let's go to the board to vote. And if those participating on Zoom could raise their hand, or otherwise if they, as to how they vote.
The motion is carried unanimously.
Thank you. We now move on to item number 9, which is the Financial Strategy Monitoring Report, which is the last of the trilogy, and Tracy stayed in the seat for that one. So do you want to talk to this report also, Tracy?
Thank you. So just one thing I thought I'd just mention with regards to this report around the balancing the books number. So at the moment we're obviously forecasting the $4 million, it then changes to the 1. So just remember that the difference between the numbers that you're seeing now, which is a reminder at the end of January, and what we're forecasting through to the end of June. So we still do have quite a few costs that come in June, things like the landfill provision and those sorts of things, which are budgeted for there as well. So just in case you're looking at that and wondering why there's a big swing at the moment, there is a lot of like year-end costs that we do have budgeted in that time.
Looking for questions? Just one from me. Are we looking at a sizable depreciation adjustment at year end? Given our discussion earlier about work in progress, but also have we got any revaluations coming through?
Yeah, we do actually. We've got the transportation revaluation coming through. So that again is and is part of the budget. But as far as actually what it will come out like, I have absolutely no visibility of that at the moment, unfortunately. But definitely something that I'm keeping an eye on. And as soon as we have an idea of what those figures will look like, I'll make sure that I bring it to the attention of the committee.
Thank you. All right, not seeing any questions there. Let's move to the staff recommendation, which is on page 70. Oh, lost it now. 72. And I will move. Do I have a seconder, please? Thanks, Councillor Maxine. Is there any discussion, any debate? All right, let's go to the board for voting, please. And those on Zoom, please.
The motion is carried unanimously.
Thank you. On financial service performance report. Oh, sorry, you wanted to move.
To item 14, if we could leave.
Or we'll do this one first, shall we, and then go to item 14. Yep, please. Sorry, sorry, Katie and Julie. So this is item number 11. And this is the non-financial service performance report, which we had the earlier quarter, didn't we, at the last meeting? So do you want to speak briefly to this as to what updates might be significantly different than the last report? I know it's a different quarter, isn't it?
Yeah, we're on quarter 2 of the non-financial service performance report.
Yep.
Oh, push my button again. So currently our year-to-date, or our year-end projected position is that we have 35 indicators that we are confident we're going to achieve. We have 6 indicators that are annual measures, and we haven't got any data on those yet. We have 3 measures that we're not sure if we'll achieve at this stage or not, and we're still monitoring them closely. And then we have 6 measures that we are not going to achieve by year end. I can give you more detail on those 6 measures if you like, or if you want to take the report as read. Yep.
Thank you. I'll look to any questions from committee members. Sorry.
So I was hoping you could.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah.
Go for it.
So we have the GDP measure that we will not meet because we will not be able to match last year's GDP. We have an ease of business measure, which looks at surveying our customers as to how easy we are to deal with. And we are about 4% below that target, so we're not confident that we're going to recoup that at this stage. We have the Hamilton Gardens attendance, so they've had really strong attendance in quarter 1 and quarter 2, but they're not confident that that's going to continue for quarters 3 and 4, so they're signalling at this stage that they're not going to meet that year-end target for visitation. Zoned business land should be 3 years of available land, but it's currently at 2.6, and again that's not going to significantly change in the next 6 months. And as reported at previous report, we have 2 rubbish indicators around the response time and the number of complaints that will not be met due to the rollout of the new program last year and the delay in dealing with some of those issues.
Mark.
Thank you. I was just looking, just while you're on the rubbish one, page 173 of our diligent report, which is, 173 on yours. It says here we're not diverting as much as we were budgeting for. Is that just a timing thing? Or have we just over budgeted? This is regards, so the amount of waste received at the council operated waste facilities is diverted from landfill. The target was at least 16,000 tonnes per annum. So far we've got 7,000 tonnes per annum.
Yeah.
I was hearing other stories that we were really tracking well.
I believe it is just the cautious approach as to where we're tracking at this stage, but if Mari can give some more detail.
It's only orange, so it's not I'm not going too worried about it.
I probably can't provide much more detail than what's in the commentary at this stage, but I can certainly ask the team to provide further update through exec update if you'd like.
Yeah, you don't go to too much trouble. I just want to have a wee look.
Just to understand.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mark. I don't see any other questions there. Just a question in terms of resetting these going forward. I presume we are resetting the expectations in accordance with a post-COVID environment, or still in COVID, but hopefully moving out.
Yep. So
because these would have been set, wouldn't they, pre-COVID, and so our attendance expectations, for example, would have been based on those facilities having been opened
Yep, so COVID will have been considered in the targets that are set for the 2021-31 LTP, as well as the level of service and the funding for those levels of service.
Right, thank you. Yes, Councillor Maxine.
I guess the one that concerns me the most is not being easy to deal with. And I wonder, there's quite a few stats around there on our call centre, page 135. Oh, no, you'll have a different...
No,
yeah. And, there's lots of stats in there about our call centres. I wonder if you can just give us a bit better of an understanding about some of the measures that you might be putting in place to turn that around or to improve on that number. Also, is that a subjective or, are we surveying people after their call?
Yep, so I'll get Julie to answer any specific measures being in place, but the mechanism we use to get this result is through customer surveys. So either when they've come to the front desk or interacted with some of our services, so it could be noise control or building control, they are sent an email link to a survey to see how easy we were to do business with. There were questions raised last quarter around call timing, which is why we've included that additional information to try and answer those queries. But if Julie can expand further on that.
I think the call timing since the rubbish and recycling has impacted on it. And I guess when customers are surveyed too, they are influenced by their transactions or discussions with staff. So it's quite hard for us to answer from the customer services centre point of view what the biggest impacts are. We're trying to investigate it further so we can really understand end to end where problems are.
Okay, so the only other thing that I would ask around that is about the customer-centric view that's held in there, and I wonder if you can explain to us how that might be used, and is there training for staff and support offered to upskill and to increase their knowledge of council services?
Yes, we have continuous training programs, particularly for customer service centre staff, and we're also developing a customer strategy that will go across the organisation. So I think that's where you'll get the biggest impacts, is where we're looking at it from an organisational point of view.
Okay, thanks very much. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, if there are no further questions, let's move to the staff recommendation, and that is that the Finance Committee receives the report. I will move. I have a seconder, please. Yep, thank you, Councillor Mark. Is there any debate? Yep, sure.
Sorry, break the flow of our fast-flowing meeting briefly, but thank you for the report. That's always really interesting, and I guess for us it's the little things that stick out. I was a little bit surprised about the gardens numbers, how we're projecting lower considering the bulb we've had. The customer service thing is really interesting, and I wonder if our comms team, with their excellent engagement, are of use to you when it comes to the way of engaging with customers at the front desk, perhaps. But I mean, you know that job better than I do, but it's one I'll be watching. And I was a wee bit surprised about the landfill diversion as well. So that's one I will be watching just in the future, and be interested in some more, because there's some really positive stories coming out of that. So I hope we don't take our foot off the brake. I mean, I get the fact we're going to always have people complaining about a change of system. I get that, and it's certainly changed the nature of the complaints that we get at customer services. So I understand that too. But I've always been extremely proud of the people we have at our front desk and our front-facing area. So any support that we can give or can be in that situation, I think that's the most important part. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. All right, if there's no further debate, we'll put the motion to the board, please. And those on Zoom, please, to indicate their preferred vote. reset.
McPherson, Councillor O'Leary and Councillor Bunting, would you mind voting?
It helps to have some
The motion is carried, noting that Councillor McPherson is in opposition.
To item number 12, which is the supply of the physical collection for the library. Welcome, Stephen.
Tēnā koutou e tēnei ata. Chair Rob, councillors, Rangai Māori. As you know, I'm Stephen Penruska, the library's director, and I'm joined today by Gail Clark, who is our korero content manager. So we would like to present the paper as read, but would like to highlight some key points for you. Hamilton City Libraries outsources 70% of our physical content purchasing through this new contract. This contract is for our printed collections, not our electronic. It includes selection, supply and shelf-ready services. This model offers us the best value for our investment at this time. Of the two compliant responders, Wheeler's books were the highest ranked for both priced and non-priced attributes. Wheeler's hold the current contract for library supply, but that contract ends in June this year. Gail and I are happy to take any questions.
Councillor Gallagher.
Can you just, in summary, it's in the report, how does this contract differ? I'm thinking of, you know, your delineation between print copy and all the other things like ebooks. And so where's the divider?
So this time round we decided to split out our printed collections from our electronic collections because the requirements for them is quite different. You'll have some companies that specialise in electronic collections and some companies that specialise in printed, and it makes sense to open up the market for us to those that are specialising in electronic only. So that is why we're going to follow this with an RFP for electronic collections. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so there's basically, it's a separate contract to try and look at, and there's no advantage of one provider across because of the more specialised, or?
No, it's the contrary. If we were looking for one provider to do both, I think we would be landing with a less perfect option for both. So this affords us the best option for our printed collections, and as Gail alluded to, we'll be bringing an RFP up at the next Finance Committee for the e-collection. But that's still in process.
Now, you also talk here about the non-financial rankings. Can you just explain that a bit, you know, local and explain it a bit more?
So we actually had, I think they mentioned in the report,
Yeah.
we went relevant experience, track record, relevant skills and methodology, but we also looked at local impact and sustainability.
Yeah.
Wheelers are the only New Zealand-based firm. They're based in Auckland, and their director is from Hamilton, and they have quite, very well done as far as their impact locally, and that they donate many picture books to various organisations, plus give discount to others for bilingual material. So they were quite outshone the other respondents with their impact for us. And the fact that they are so local also affords us the ability to visit them on site, whereas the other companies were all overseas, and we would never probably get the opportunity to visit them at their premises, which is a big thing.
Sure. So, and as you're aware, with our external contracts, we look at living wage and fair wages and a good industrial relations record. This company meets that record, albeit it's hard to measure an overseas company in that criteria, I get it.
They have very loyal staff, and even though I don't know what they pay their staff, they obviously do a good job. They offer their staff the ability to work from home, which is a great sustainability initiative. Plus, whenever we've visited them, it's like the Wheelers family, and I think their staff are quite loyal. So to me, that you conclude that they treat their staff well.
Because given that they're, an ongoing partner of this organisation, it's good to know that they will broadly reflect the culture of our organisation. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
And then you're back on Friday, is that right, to answer digitisation, library services for Norton and Enderley?
Thursday, yes.
Thursday.
Community
Right, good.
Committee.
Look forward to that. Thank you.
Thanks, councillor. Just a couple of questions from me, as I don't see any questions there. Other questions? Bennett's, the other company who you ranked there, is that the same company that a few years ago had bookshops at all the universities and at Polytechs?
No, quite a different company, actually. They are an American firm that were recently bought out by a large American firm, but it's a different organisation altogether.
A different Bennett's, okay. And just the price grading on paragraph 20, I assume the price grading, the higher the price, the higher the grading, the cheaper the price?
Yes,
yes. Okay.
So the majority of the price is based on fixed fee per book, because obviously the price of a book will vary considerably.
Yep.
So the difference was $7.90 fixed fee for Wheelers and $7.98 for James Bennett. And when you purchase the quantity that we do, even though that's only 8 cents, it does end up being a fairly significant amount of money.
Yeah, because it is quite a difference, isn't there, on the rating scale between
Yes.
the two? Yeah. Okay, thank you. That's my questions. All right, let's go to if there are no further. Sorry, councillor. I think Councillor Mark wanted to move.
I defer to Councillor Bunting.
Okay, and your second.
Say.
Well, hang on. Did Councillor Mark want to?
Sorry. Yeah. Look, very quickly. This is more than just buying books. It is a critical partnership in terms of the quality of the service, and I would. I know Councillor Wilson's listening to me on every word. He is. And kind of that local relationship, I think, is really critical, and the nuance, and I certainly look forward to the other part of the different contract coming back and seeing how they are complementary. As I alluded to before, I'm looking forward to Thursday because that's another part of this particular broader discussion.
Councillor Mark.
Thank you. Endorsing what Councillor Gallo has said, and I just wanted to pass on my thanks to you both. I think there was an excellent report, and I think you answered the questions really, really well, so it made it really easy for us to understand. As head of community, I'm just really proud of what you are achieving with our libraries at the moment, and I'm looking forward to great things in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go to the board. Oh, sorry. Yeah, I thought you were talking to someone else.
About this, very important. I just need to note that this particular entity has bought some of my books in the past. But I need to make a note of it. But I don't believe I'm conflicted in. Well, actually, that would be counterintuitive.
I guess, did we buy them back?
If they're buying them.
Did we buy them back for the library?
Yeah, they're in the library.
In the remainder, Bob. No.
All right. Well,
yeah, I just wanted to note.
Your comment is noted.
I don't believe I'm.
Okay. All right. We have no further debaters. So let's move to the board to vote on this. And those on Zoom, please, to indicate their support or otherwise. Please, no talking while we're voting.
The motion is carried unanimously.
Thank you. And thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Gail, for your presentation today. Thank you. Okay, next item is the Human Resource Contract, Information Services Contract Award, which is item 14. And welcome, Murray. Is this the first time you've been in front of council?
It is.
Okay, well, welcome. And Murray, of course, is one of the most important senior leadership team members, or close to the senior leadership team. So welcome.
Great, thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. I'll take the paper as read. I just have a few other comments. This is part of our renewal program. It was triggered because the supplier, Ascenda, decided to do an early decommissioning of the application, and with that notification, actually triggered us to start the investigation around our requirements and developing a business case. As part of the 32 New Zealand-based clients that currently use this application, there are 16 government agencies, and we've been working with those other agencies to try and get Ascenda to extend that time frame. Unfortunately, Ascenda have dug their heels in, and they're refusing to move past the decommissioning date or non-support date of April 22. What that means is that come April 22, we will no longer have a supported human resources information system, or more importantly, a payroll system. But this human resources information management system is more than just a payroll system. We currently have three systems that make up our human capital management capability, that deals with the 13 different functions across the organisation. Now these are quite heavily integrated, and we have a number of issues around data quality, around manual and time-consuming processes, single source of truth of data, and operational inefficiencies. So when we looked at this as an opportunity to actually remove that complexity from our environment. We explored 4 different options. One was moving to Ascenda's new payroll system. One was to look at Civica, our current ERP platform. Another one was to outsource our payroll, and the other was to move to a fully featured human resources system. We decided that the recommended option would be to move to a fully featured human resources system, as it offered far more functionality at the same price as just replacing the payroll. Not only that, that the outsourced payroll, when we looked at that component, we didn't have any cost benefit in terms of moving to an outsourced provider. Again, it was the same cost as it was if we were operating it internally. So to move to a fully functioned human resource information system, we get to consolidate and simplify our environment. We get to reduce our process complexity and move to fit-for-purpose processes, which help us improve our productivity and also ensure that we have compliance. I'm happy to take questions.
Just through the chair, just to add one thing that Murray's comprehensively advised you all. So with those other 16 government agencies now needing to, in the same boat as us, what sort of, do you want to just talk about the pressure on suppliers to be able to actually respond?
Sure. So we've talked about availability of resource earlier on in the session, but there are not enough people in New Zealand to actually respond to the 32 different requests over the next 12 months. I'm now fielding calls from other agencies and also from other organisations, can we share our sets of requirements now, because they've only just started to do something about it, and they've realised that Ascenda, having now not wanting to move their date, they will not be able to meet the requirement, and they're now struggling to get resource off the market to be able to meet their timeframes. So we're in a unique position where we have negotiated or talked to our suppliers and in a position to begin negotiation with those contracts and lock in a supplier and to not only implement but also to fulfil those functions.
Okay, thank you. Questions? I don't see any on the board, but we have questions?
I just wonder whether there's an opportunity in terms of economies of scale with those other 32 who might be left out in the cold. Is there an opportunity to be able to join up with a group of them to spread the cost of that at all?
So every organisation has their own unique set of requirements in terms of how they implement human resource capability and functions. There would have been an opportunity to to look at doing those requirements, or if we selected the same system to leverage contract negotiations, but none of those other agencies or other organisations are at that level where they have even evaluated their requirements or have actually looked at their options available to them. So we'd be actually placing ourselves back essentially 4 months.
So we've got the jump on them.
We've got the jump on them.
So is there then any advantage to us in the future, after we've set up this system, to be able to leverage assistance to others?
Yes, there is, and we're currently doing that.
Good. Yeah. Thanks. Thanks.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions, but I've got a couple here. I take it that the motion is very clear that we have bypassed our standard procurement policy and processes in order to appoint Lgfa Group, because we've identified them as being a provider in our market and one of the few providers in our market, and we're saving some time by not going through the normal RFP process. Is that?
Yeah, that's correct.
Is that a good summary? Is that a summary? Yeah. Okay.
Yes, that's a good summary. We saw that going through a normal procurement process would have added another 3 months, and therefore we would have missed the implementation timeframe.
Okay. And just in terms of the payment to Lgfa, in the motion at 2.145 million, in paragraph 9 we're talking about 2.761 million. What's the reason for the differences there?
So the payment to Lgfa is $1.3 million. $1.3 million for future years, and $800,000 this year. So it's actually in total of 2.1 million. So we've got costs that will be incurred this year, and costs that will be incurred next year, which is actually not only implementing payroll, but is also implementing the other functions as well, like time and attendance, rostering, organ position management, all of which are essential to make our human capital management functions work.
So should we change the amount in is the approved contract sum still 2.145 million, or is it 2.76?
Oh, yeah, it's split between two vendors. Yes.
If you notice the recommendation, it's split between point A and point B as the two vendors. The paragraph you're reading in 9 is the total.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Yes.
I see.
So it's the total
My
business
apologies.
case, which is then split between the two vendors, which is what the recommendation is.
Okay, so the arithmetic all adds up, does it?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, it should, because I did it. And if it doesn't, then it's my fault.
Okay.
Yeah.
And the last question is around Ascender. I presume we continue to pay them up until the date that they withdraw their services, and that's 31. Is it 31 March of next year?
It's 31 March next year when we swap over our systems.
Do we have any action against them in terms of contracts that might be in place as a result of their withdrawal of the service? And I'm thinking here that there's a group of 30, is it 31 others?
Yeah, that's currently being explored by the government agencies. That's the next step that they're looking at taking, is the potential to litigate. But again, if they're unsuccessful, the date still remains, and we're still
I know we've still got the issue ahead of us.
Yes,
one way or the other. But then, if we have, if we are incurring additional costs as a result of the change, whether or not we've got an opportunity to try and recover some of that. Yep. Okay. Any further questions from any Finance Committee members? I'm not seeing any. So the motion then is, recommendation is, and that's a recommendation to Council, is on page 184. I will move. Seconder, Councillor Ryan. Is there any discussion or debate? No. Okay, let's go to the board and vote on this. And those on Zoom, please.
The motion is carried unanimously.
Thank you, and thanks, Murray. Now, the next item is the resolution to exclude the public, and I will move. Councillor Marr, we continue with the meeting, yep, okay, let's do that. And we do have Matt here. Then, once the doors are closed and we get to confirm that the cameras,